Hey, on segment 2, we're going to cover 6 items: lead placement, name of shocks, spring heights, gas pressures, pull bar placement, and right rear bounce. That's all in segment 2, so let's get started. Do we got some questions over there that we want to get started on?
Yeah. Chuck Sanders asks, lead placement on a modified, when to move lead and what effect? Also high or low?
Okay. So the question was, and I'll repeat these questions just to make sure that we can hear them, but the question is where to put lead on a modified, high or low, and when to put it on there. Okay. So in general, so we're putting lead right now, like people are putting lead on the rear axle, the rear end, the rear underslung, and in front of the car. Okay. Sometimes lead in the moisture is just going to be a little bit of a problem. So there may be that where you want to have it and don't have it. If I'm spinning the tires coming off late exit, and I'm kind of up on rear percent, maybe 56 and a half, well, I'm going to try to put some lead on it. If I'm down, I might put a little rear percent or put a little more preload in it. The lead in the rear of the car needs to be right in around that rear end, and down low would help. Lead on the axle tube is not my favorite. It's very effective, but they should just make it illegal because it's just a very unsafe place to put lead. And I've heard all the stories about how great everything is, but I've also seen the effects of lead coming off a car like that and hitting somebody in the head. And fortunately for this individual, if it would have been an inch over, he'd have been dead. As a doornail. So, barely touched him, and it caused permanent damage for the rest of his life. So, don't really like that deal. It is really good for the car. So if you can figure out a way to manage that weight to a bird cage or the inside or something that's not going to fall off on the racetrack, then that would be better. Lead in the front of the car needs to be low. When you're going to put lead on is when the track slows down, because you want weight movement. You want to transfer that weight to that tire and load that tire. So when the track slows down, it's not going to transfer as much. So you need to make a transfer. So you need to either raise the lead in the car, like say if you can't get the car to load the right rear, and you really can't get any more lead on there. And don't think you can put enough lead on the car, you're going to hurt it. So that's the big fear of everybody. Don't want to add weight to the car. Well, if you don't want to add weight, run towards the back. If you want to be fast, you're going to be putting lead on your car. And you're going to be doing things with that lead that are unusual for what we've done in the past. So, kind of start to figure that out and utilize it because it's very, very, very good for the car. So lead, we need it on our cars. Probably needs to be within the spring table if it can be. Don't put it on the back bumper, and it needs to be low in the car, especially in the front of the car.
Johnny Vaught asks, if my VSB right rear shock doesn't say SRT or anything, is it a base valve? It does say 100 PSI.
No, it's typically 100 PSI shock is, thank you, Johnny, so the question is that shock a base valve? It says 100 PSI on it. And no. So we are sending most of our sealed stuff out the door around 35 PSI. And you're always going to have a little gas, okay? Because you got a divider piston in there. And depending on the brand of shock, depends on how much gas you need. So that divider piston needs to move. If the divider piston doesn't move, shock's not going to function properly. So 35 PSI, it should say base valve on it. We try really hard to always say SRT base valve, whether it's SRT or base valve. It 99% of the time will say it on the paperwork. That particular shock is not a base valve.
Okay, Chad Smith said 8-inch or 9.5 for front springs on A mod.
Okay, so Chad Smith. Okay, Chad. This is a good question because this is also something that's going on. And, guys, if you're not doing it, I mean, just don't jump to that 8-inch spring deal. Okay, because we've raced for 30 years or more in a modified on a 9.5-inch spring. Okay, our front spring is 9 inches, and we modeled it. When we modeled that spring, it just ended up being 9 inches. And once the modeling was done, once the design was done, changing that 1/2 inch changed a lot of work. And so we didn't go back and redo it. And we fall into the 1/2 inch rule, say in IMCA, plus or minus 1/2 inch from 9.5. But when you go to an 8-inch spring, what this has done, this has moved the center of gravity up in the car in the front 1 inch. Okay, and it can help. There's cars out there that won't roll. There's cars out there that aren't transferring weight very well, and this will really help transfer the weight. But for those cars that are, and for guys that are on, I mean, we're so screwed up right now in the front of these cars with 300, 400 pound springs and now 8-inch springs that we're creating a mess. Okay, and we can't get the mess fixed fast enough before something else comes along. So if you're racing a 9.5-inch spring or a 9-inch spring, just race it. If your car will not get on the right front, you need to go look for those reasons and then fix those reasons. Okay, and then the last resort would be maybe to get to an 8-inch spring. If you're at a racetrack, it's really slow. 8-inch spring might be a better deal. But for a lot of guys, just don't go out and buy 8-inch springs because it's the newest trick on the market, because it will probably get you in trouble. So,
Cody Williams asked, going up on gas pressure on left rear, does it add traction or take away being stiffer?
Okay, Cody. Cody asked if going up on gas pressure adds traction or makes it stiffer. So let's understand, in the last 18 months, we've run the gauntlet on left rear shocks. We've gone from a good shock to crazy stupid shock to back towards good. Yeah. So sorry about that. My phone dinged, but headed back towards good. Okay. So let's understand this. The left rear shock is not going to hold the car up. Okay. Now Cody's scenario where he's in a hobby stock, and the hobby stocks are uniquely different because of the lack of jack bolts. So there are times that you could use, and we don't do it, but there are times you could use rod force to create drive in a car. Okay. But in general, understand, as the compression goes up, the gas must go up. Okay. If you dyno your shock down at slower speeds, you can get it across the dyno with less gas in it, but it doesn't mean it's going to race. Okay. So if you can't get a good dyno graph at 10 inches, even at 10 inches sometimes, we kind of like to max out around 300 PSI, kind of for safety reasons. And there's times it needs 350. And I don't think that's a good shock to be racing on. Gas pressure will kill traction in the rear of the car. Modifieds, for sure. B-mods, stock cars, it may help add a little traction to the car. Hobby stocks, we try to build drive through the spring. So in general, gas pressure is not your friend. Okay? If you have to depend on rod force to hold the car up, you need to change your driving style. That's a whole different subject. If you can't do it, then run it on gas. Thank you, Cody.
Wade Wagon Blast asked, what causes the right rear to bounce or pogo on a sport mod when the track is a little rougher? We increased rebound from a 1-75 to a 1-100.
Well, and by doing that, you should have seen So the question is what's causing the right rear to pogo? And on a Northern Sport mod, it's probably going to be spring location, because it's really hard to run a load on the right rear with that spring on top. So there are some things that we need to do. Okay, people. Northern Sport mod, spring on top. USRA B mod, spring on top. There are some benefits to running some product that we have in them classes on that right rear. Is it going to fix it? No. Will it make it better? Yes. Will it make it noticeably better? Yes. Okay. You need to call about that. But are you going to have to change the right rear more frequently? You should. So to make everything work over there, and what you're probably experiencing is a little bit of load unload. Okay, very hard to keep it loaded because of the spring angles and the bow in the spring and everything that it's doing. IMCA is a little worse probably than USRA. Somebody that has a USRA car, it's probably a little worse because IMCA is making you keep the spring inboard a little more. So, we might look at the rebound on that weight a little bit, and if we feel like it's a bigger problem, but we might look at the mounting and go ahead and fix the issue there on the mounting and see if that don't improve the traction on the right rear. And we might need to look at the spring rate, because if we're too stiff, too soft, we could get in that scenario too. So 225, that 232, that 230, 250, that Vari-Rate spring we have, that would be a very good right rear spring for that car.
Sandra Scheifler asks, can you talk about the side-to-side placement of a pull bar? Example, 1 inch left or right of center on the trans side or quick change side?
Yeah. So the question is, if I move my pull bar, thank you, Sandra. If I move my pull bar side to side, what's the effects? Okay. And you're right. You're in this 1 inch window. So let's say you're center line. And I'm going to say just right off the bat that there's better things to maybe be doing than moving the pull bar side to side. But if you was to move the pull bar to the left, you're going to tighten the car up a bunch. Okay. And 1 inch. And I don't feel like any reason to be that tight. If you move it to the right, you're going to pull the car off the right rear probably before you get out of the corner. And I'm sure Jesse's all right with this, but Jesse Stovall had a car back in the day that we was at Wheatland, Missouri, and you could see exactly when the car come off the right rear, and of course, because he'd be coming through the corner like gangbusters, and then all of a sudden it just like died, and that's when the car come off the right rear. And years later, I asked him, I said, what did he do to fix it? And he said, well, when they first put the car together, they got the rear end moved over a little bit, and they got the pull bar too far to the right. So it was pulling, it was pulling the car off the right rear, and that was before, anybody really started doing anything to maintain right rear load. So it auto modified, if you move it at the back. So there's all this, people saying, oh, I pointed at the right front, I do this, I do that. And they get all this effect, okay? But it doesn't seem to be across the board when you move it in the front. If you move it in the rear, everybody seems to agree that, freed my car up, tightened my car up. But when you move it at the front on a pull bar, the effect is, I think, more to the individual. Now, on a lift arm, if you move it in the front, it's more effective. Okay, so we have done lift arms where they were on the left side, but they crossed back over to the normal front position, and there was zero effect to the car. So pull bar, when you move the back, really makes a difference. I think the front's kind of per individual. The arc at the front, the flatness of the bar, and truly think if we could make it to where we could move our bars forward and aft, we'd be light years ahead versus up and down.